Welcome to Hidden Chapters. The cost wasn't immediate. It still had to be paid. Let's begin. I thought it was just another evacuation. Another wounded civilian. Another difficult flight. I didn't know that saving him would follow me years later. And that the real story hadn't even started yet. The call came late. Not emergency late, just inconvenient enough that nobody expected complications. Routine medical extraction. Injured civilian caught near a conflict zone perimeter. Nothing unusual. Happens more often than people realize. I was the medic on rotation that night. Weather marginal. Visibility acceptable but deteriorating. Pilot already calculating fuel margins carefully before we even lifted off. Everything about the mission felt standard, the kind you do on autopilot after enough years in uniform. That's usually when surprises happen. We reached the pickup zone without incident. Small temporary landing strip, barely more than packed dirt and portable lights. Security team already on site. No active fighting nearby, just residual instability. Then they brought him out. Stretcher first. Silence second. When experienced soldiers go quiet around a patient, it usually means the situation is worse than the initial report suggested. And it was. Multiple injuries. Significant blood loss. Shallow breathing. The kind of condition where every minute matters but outcomes stay uncertain. Civilian contractor, someone said quickly. Wrong place, wrong time. That explanation never feels complete. But it was enough. We loaded him fast. Engine stayed hot. Rotor wash kicking dust everywhere. No time for extended assessment on the ground. Stabilization would happen in the air, which is never ideal but often necessary. Once airborne, reality settled in. Vitals unstable. Pulse irregular. Blood pressure dropping faster than I liked. Standard protocols kicked in automatically, airway support, bleeding control, monitoring, medication adjustments. The routine you rely on when adrenaline threatens clarity. Still, something about him stood out. Not medically. Personally. Even unconscious, he carried himself differently. Hard to explain. Presence, maybe. Confidence ingrained deeply enough to show even under sedation. Or maybe I imagined it. Fuel calculation started coming over the headset 15 minutes into the flight. Weather worsening faster than forecast. Alternate landing options limited. Pilot calm but focused, the tone professionals use when margins shrink. That meant one thing. We didn't have unlimited time. Protocol in those situations prioritizes survivability probability. Hard decisions sometimes follow. Stabilize enough for transport, but avoid interventions that risk the entire crew if conditions deteriorate. I understood the logic. Still didn't like it. Because his vitals weren't just unstable. They were slipping. And slipping patients rarely recover without sustained attention. I adjusted positioning, rechecked bleeding control, recalibrated monitoring equipment. Small corrections that sometimes by minutes. Minutes matter more than people think. He opened his eyes once. Just briefly. Disoriented. Pain evident. But aware enough to focus on me. Didn't speak. Just held eye contact. Like he understood something I didn't yet. Then sedation pulled him back under. Pilot updated again, weather window tightening. Landing priority increased. No delays possible. Which meant whatever I did next needed to work fast. Because this flight suddenly wasn't routine anymore. It was becoming a race between physiology and fuel. And neither side was known for waiting patiently. Once you feel a patient slipping, time stops behaving normally. 5 minutes feels like 30. 30 seconds feels like nothing. And every small decision suddenly carries weight far beyond the procedure itself. His blood pressure kept dropping. Not catastrophically. Just steadily. The kind of decline that looks manageable until it isn't. I adjusted fluids, checked bandages again, monitored breathing rhythm. Everything technically correct, and still not enough. The pilot's voice came over comms again. Weather closing faster than expected. We're diverting to the closest strip. No guarantees beyond that. Translation: land soon or risk not landing safely at all. Standard protocol in those situations is simple. Stabilize as best you can. Prepare for immediate transfer on landing. Don't overextend resources mid-air unless absolutely necessary. But absolutely necessary is a judgment call. And I'd seen enough borderline cases to know that hesitation sometimes costs more than action. He moved slightly under sedation. Not waking fully, just reflex movement. Still, it told me something important. His body was fighting. That's always a good sign, but it also means internal systems are under strain. I leaned closer, checked pupil response again, reassessed airway positioning. Small corrections, but critical ones. The helicopter turbulence didn't help. Every adjustment required extra focus just to keep hands steady. Outside, weather darkened faster than forecast predicted. Rotor noise deepened slightly, subtle sign the pilot was working harder to maintain stable flight. Crew tension increased quietly. No panic. Just heightened awareness. Professionals don't raise their voices. They tighten their movements. His pulse flickered irregularly again. That's when I made the decision. Not heroic. Not dramatic. Just slightly beyond conservative protocol. I stayed fully focused on him instead of rotating attention between equipment checks and broader cabin awareness. Technically someone else could monitor secondary systems. Practically, it meant committing to this one patient entirely. Because partial attention rarely saves unstable casualties. Minutes passed. Adjustments worked slowly. Pressure stabilized enough to stop declining. Breathing more consistent. Still critical, but no longer actively worsening. That was progress. And progress buys options. Pilot updated again. 10 minutes to landing if conditions hold. 5 if they don't. Not reassuring. But workable. I kept talking quietly even though he was sedated. Habit. Sometimes unconscious patients still respond subtly. Sometimes medics talk simply to maintain their own rhythm. You're doing fine, I said calmly. Stay with me. Almost there. Simple words. No guarantees. Just presence. He squeezed my wrist weakly once. Reflex maybe. Or acknowledgement. Hard to tell. But it reinforced the decision. Keep going. Landing lights finally appeared through the cockpit window haze. Rough strip. Emergency medical team waiting. Engine stayed hot again, no full shutdown. Quick transfer planned. Touchdown wasn't smooth, but it was safe. Doors opened immediately. Cold air rushed in. Ground medics efficient, professional, fast. Handoff brief but thorough. Every second accounted for. They took him. And just like that. The intense focus of the flight dissolved. Mission technically complete. Patient transferred alive. Weather worsening behind us. Pilot already calculating next move. I sat back finally, hands still steady but adrenaline fading. Another evacuation. Another unknown civilian. No expectation of follow-up. That's how most of these end. You help. You move on. Names rarely stick. Stories rarely continue. At least. That's what I thought then. Because I had no idea that years later. That same man would knock on my door. Alive. Successful. And carrying a story I hadn't heard yet. One that started on this flight. But definitely didn't end there. After that flight, everything went back to routine faster than I expected. That's how military life works. Intense moments, then immediate normalization. Next mission, next briefing, next responsibility. You don't always get closure. Most of the time, you don't even get updates. Patients disappear into the medical system. And medics move on. I asked once, out of professional curiosity. Not formally, just through informal channels. Status unknown. Transferred to civilian hospital. Condition serious but stable. No further details. That was enough. Or at least, it had to be. Weeks passed. Then months. The memory stayed vivid at first, unstable vitals, tightening weather window, that brief moment when his eyes opened mid-flight. But even strong memories fade when new responsibilities pile on. Eventually, it became just another story I told occasionally. Not dramatic. Not heroic. Just a reminder that sometimes small decisions matter more than they seem at the time. Then deployment ended. Return to regular base duties. Predictable schedules. Training cycles. Administrative tasks. The quieter side of military life most people don't see. Life outside uniform adjusted too. My son finishing school. My wife happy to have fewer sudden departures. Even simple things like consistent dinners together started feeling important again. Stability has its own rhythm. And after years of unpredictability, you learn to appreciate it. That's probably why I didn't expect anything from that flight to resurface. Because most evacuation stories don't. Civilians recover, move on, rebuild their lives. Soldiers continue service. Paths separate naturally. That's healthy. Or so I thought. 2 years passed without a single mention of him. No news. No messages. Nothing. Which reinforced the assumption, he survived, moved forward, and that chapter closed. Then the base mail office called. Unusual delivery. Civilian courier. Signature required personally. No military routing information attached. That alone raised curiosity. Packages reaching operational bases usually follow strict channels. This one didn't. The box itself was simple. No corporate branding. No official markings. Just my name written cleanly, professionally. Inside was a letter. Handwritten. Short. Clear. I don't know if you remember me. You saved my life during an evacuation flight 2 years ago. I would like to thank you properly. I'll be in your city next week. Dinner? No company name. No explanation. No reference to who he was now. Just appreciation. And a request. I showed it to my wife first. She smiled slightly, relief mixed with curiosity. Well, she said, that's not something you get every day. True. But something else caught my attention. The handwriting. Confident. Controlled. Familiar somehow. Not from memory, from presence. The same composed energy I'd sensed even when he was unconscious on that helicopter. People carry themselves consistently. Even in handwriting. I considered declining. Professional distance is often safer. Medics don't expect gratitude beyond survival itself. Still. Curiosity won. And something about the letter suggested this wasn't just a thank you dinner. It felt intentional. So I agreed. Without realizing that meeting him again would change how I understood that entire flight. And possibly my own future too. I nearly didn't go. Not because I wasn't curious. Because military habit teaches distance. You help people, then you step back. personal involvement complicates professional clarity. And clarity keeps everyone safer. Still, I'd already replied yes. Location, a restaurant downtown. Not flashy. Not hidden either. Neutral. Comfortable. The kind of place business conversations happen without drawing attention. That detail stuck with me. Most civilians who want to thank someone pick somewhere emotional. Personal. Familiar. He chose strategic neutral ground. Which told me he'd changed since that evacuation flight. Or maybe he'd always been like that. I arrived early out of habit. Observed the environment automatically. Entrances, sight lines, general crowd behavior. You never completely turn that off once you've served long enough. Then he walked in. And I recognized him instantly. Not because of the injuries, those were long healed. Not because of appearance exactly. Because of posture. Calm awareness. Controlled movement. Same presence I'd noticed even when he was barely conscious on that helicopter. But now there was something else. Confidence backed by resources. Success tends to show quietly in people who've earned it. He smiled first. Good to see you standing, I said. Good to be standing, he replied. Simple exchange. But meaningful. We kept conversation light at first. Family. Transition back to normal life. Work without specifics. Both of us understood boundaries instinctively. Then he addressed the obvious. I owe you more than thanks, he said calmly. I was doing my job, I answered automatically. Maybe, he said. But not everyone does it the way you did. That line told me something important. He'd learned details about that flight. More than most civilians ever do. Then he explained. Before the incident, he'd been a regional logistics entrepreneur. Moderate success. Growing business. Nothing extraordinary. After recovery. Things accelerated. Contracts expanded. Partnerships formed. Investments multiplied. He built infrastructure networks. Transportation systems. Eventually diversified into international supply chains. And somewhere along that timeline, his net worth crossed 8 figures. Over 10 million. Maybe more now. He said it casually. No arrogance. Just factual. I nodded politely. Money impresses some people. Experience impresses others. To me, survival mattered more than net worth. But the story wasn't about money. Not really. I didn't contact you sooner intentionally, he continued. I wanted to rebuild first. Stand independently. Gratitude feels different when you're stable. That made sense. Then he leaned slightly closer. There's another reason too. Tone shifted. Still calm. But more deliberate. That flight changed how I evaluate people, he said. Pressure reveals character. You stayed when protocol would have allowed distance. I didn't respond immediately. Because that observation cut closer than casual gratitude. Since then, he added, I've supported veteran transition programs quietly. Nothing public. Just, making sure people who carried responsibility aren't forgotten afterward. That part caught my attention. Not charity. Infrastructure. Opportunity. Long-term thinking. Then he said something unexpected. I don't want to repay you. That would reduce what happened to a transaction. But if there's ever something you need, guidance, connection, opportunity, you should know the door is open. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just offered. Respectfully. And suddenly the dinner felt less like gratitude. More like the beginning of a different kind of relationship. One built not on debt. But on mutual recognition. And I realized something quietly then. Saving his life hadn't ended on that helicopter. It had simply changed both of ours in ways neither of us predicted. And that change was only starting to unfold. After that dinner, I expected distance again. That's usually how these situations go. A meaningful meeting, a handshake, maybe an occasional message on holidays, then life resumes its own pace. Professional worlds rarely merge cleanly with personal ones. But this was different. Not because he had money. Because he understood responsibility. 2 weeks later, he invited me to visit one of his logistics facilities. No pressure. No expectations. Just an open invitation to see what he'd built since that evacuation flight. I hesitated at first. Military culture encourages self-reliance. Accepting help sometimes feels unearned, even when offered sincerely. Still, curiosity and respect eventually outweighed hesitation. The facility surprised me. Not flashy. Not corporate polished. Functional. Efficient. Structured the way operational environments should be. Clear sight lines. Logical workflow. People focused on tasks without unnecessary noise. It reminded me more of a well-run base than a civilian business. He noticed my reaction. I built it the way I remember stability feeling, he explained. Predictable systems. Clear communication. Backup plans everywhere. Trauma often reshapes priorities. Survival teaches organization. We walked through operations slowly. He introduced me simply as someone important to my story. No grand titles. No dramatic explanations. That discretion mattered. Employees treated him with quiet respect, not fear. Another good sign. Authority based on competence lasts longer than authority based on intimidation. Eventually we reached a smaller office area set aside from main operations. That's where the conversation shifted again. I've been thinking about something, he said carefully. Not a favor. More like an opportunity that aligns with your experience. My guard went up slightly. Offers tied to gratitude can blur boundaries. He sensed it immediately. No obligation, he added. Just listen first. Fair enough. He explained that many veterans transitioning out of active service struggled not with skills, but with context. Translating operational experience into civilian leadership, crisis management, logistics, security planning. His companies occasionally hired veterans. Results were consistently strong. But integration wasn't always smooth. So I'm considering building a formal advisory program, he said. Not charity. Professional consulting. Veterans guiding infrastructure resilience, crisis planning, operational discipline. And he wanted my input. Not as a token hero. As someone who understood both field pressure and ethical responsibility. That distinction mattered. I asked practical questions. Scope. Authority. Long-term sustainability. Not emotional ones. Those rarely help in strategic decisions. His answers were thoughtful. Measured. Realistic. Still, I didn't commit. Because military identity doesn't switch off overnight. Transition requires timing, readiness, family alignment. My wife and son were part of any future decision too. He respected that. Take your time, he said. The offer doesn't expire. Before leaving, he added something quieter. That night on the helicopter, you treated me like a person, not just a casualty. I try to run my companies the same way. That stayed with me. Because leadership often reflects the moments that shaped it. Driving home later, I realized this relationship wasn't about repayment. It was about continuity. One decision leading to another. Responsibility extending beyond the battlefield. And maybe a new chapter forming that neither of us could have predicted back when fuel was low, whether closing in, and survival was the only goal. Sometimes saving a life doesn't end the story. It starts a longer one. And that longer story was still unfolding. I didn't answer him right away. That wasn't hesitation out of fear, it was habit. Military decisions, especially ones affecting family and long-term direction, aren't made impulsively. You gather information, evaluate risk, consider secondary effects. And this decision had plenty of those. My wife listened carefully when I explained the advisory program idea. She didn't react emotionally. That's something I've always respected about her, calm analysis even when stakes are personal. It sounds meaningful, she said. Just make sure it doesn't pull you into something you can't step away from. Fair point. Military service already demands enough permanence. Civilian opportunities should offer flexibility, not new constraints. My son surprised me more. He wasn't intimidated by the businessman angle at all. He focused on impact. If you can help other veterans transition easier, that seems worth exploring, he said. You always talk about how hard that part is. He wasn't wrong. Leaving operational environments behind isn't just career change, it's identity adjustment. Structure, purpose, camaraderie, clarity. Civilians rarely understand how deeply those elements shape people. And how destabilizing their absence can feel. A week later, I accepted a preliminary advisory role. Limited hours. Clear boundaries. No operational conflicts. Fully transparent arrangement. Professional. Respectful. Sustainable. The first months were observational mostly. Facility assessments. Communication protocol reviews. Crisis simulation exercises. Translating military-style contingency planning into civilian infrastructure language. Surprisingly effective. Because crises don't respect sector boundaries. Logistics, security, communication, the fundamentals remain consistent whether you're in uniform or a business environment. Employees responded well too. Not hero worship. Professional curiosity. Many had never interacted directly with someone from a military background beyond media stereotypes. Real conversations corrected misconceptions quickly. And I learned from them too. Civilian operations have efficiencies military structures sometimes lack. Flexibility, innovation speed, resource allocation agility. Useful perspectives. The businessman, I'd started calling him Daniel by then, kept involvement balanced. No excessive gratitude gestures. No favoritism. Just mutual professional respect. That mattered. Because relationships built on obligation rarely last. Then something unexpected happened. His companies began attracting attention. Not negative exactly. Just interest. Media inquiries. Partnership offers. Occasional regulatory reviews. Normal for growing enterprises, but the timing felt concentrated. Daniel remained calm about it. Growth brings visibility, he said simply. Still, my operational instincts noticed patterns. Certain inquiries focused less on business performance and more on resilience infrastructure. Crisis protocols. Security planning. Veteran advisory involvement. Questions that suggested someone wasn't just curious about logistics. They were assessing capability. I didn't jump to conclusions. But I adjusted awareness. Quietly. Professionally. Daniel appreciated the input without dramatizing it. We stay transparent, he said. And prepared. Preparation rarely hurts. Especially when environments shift subtly. At home, life stayed stable. Family comfortable with my new balance. Less deployment uncertainty. More predictable schedule. That alone justified exploring this path. Yet something in the background felt unfinished. Like the helicopter flight years ago had opened a door neither of us fully understood yet. Daniel once told me survival changes trajectory permanently. I was starting to see what he meant. Because saving his life hadn't just influenced his business future. It was gradually reshaping mine too. And sometimes, new directions only reveal their full impact much later. Often when you least expect it. Which, in my experience, usually means another turning point is coming. The first real sign something was off didn't come from intelligence reports or security alerts. It came from silence. Daniel's companies usually ran on constant communication, logistics updates, supply coordination, infrastructure monitoring, client interaction. That steady operational hum is what keeps large systems stable. Then, gradually, that rhythm changed. Not dramatically. Just enough for someone used to operational environments to notice. Delayed responses. Unexpected cancellations. Meetings shifted last minute without clear reasons. Nothing alarming individually. But patterns rarely lie. Daniel stayed outwardly calm. He'd navigated business volatility before. Markets fluctuate, partnerships evolve, regulations tighten and loosen. Normal cycles. Still, during one advisory session, he admitted something. Some partners are asking unusual questions, he said. Not about contracts. About contingency planning. Personnel structures. Veteran involvement. Which meant they weren't assessing profitability. They were assessing resilience. That kind of interest rarely comes from competitors alone. Sometimes it comes from groups looking for leverage. Not necessarily hostile, just strategic. I suggested simple adjustments. Enhanced communication transparency. Routine security audits. Clear documentation of operational protocols. Nothing aggressive. Just professional preparedness. He agreed immediately. That told me he sensed it too. At home, I kept discussions minimal. Family stability matters more than professional speculation. My wife noticed subtle tension anyway, she always does, but trusted my judgment. My son asked a direct question one evening. You think something bad could happen? I chose honesty without alarm. I think preparation is smart. That's all. Preparation isn't fear. It's responsibility. Weeks passed without escalation. Operations continued smoothly. Advisory program expanded slowly, helping several veterans transition into infrastructure consulting roles. Positive outcomes. Real impact. Then came the first overt pressure point. A scheduled infrastructure partnership suddenly withdrew. No financial dispute. No performance issue. Just, reassessment. Language intentionally vague. That alone wasn't unusual. But two more followed within 10 days. Independent decisions. Possibly. Coordinated influence. Also possible. Daniel handled it professionally. No public reaction. No defensive posture. Just quiet operational adjustments. Still, I saw the calculation behind his calm. Visibility had increased. And visibility attracts attention. Good and bad. During one late meeting, he said something that stuck. You saved my life once. Now it feels like we're protecting something bigger than either of us individually. Not dramatic. Just observational. Because infrastructure affects communities. Jobs. Stability. Veteran reintegration programs. Supply continuity. Real-world impact. And anything impactful draws interest from multiple directions. None of it meant imminent danger. But pressure environments evolve gradually. That's what makes them unpredictable. You rarely get clear warning. Just accumulating signals. Professional instinct told me we were entering a monitoring phase. Not defensive yet. Just attentive. Daniel agreed. Stay steady, he said. No overreaction. Correct approach. Still. The helicopter flight years ago had been about immediate survival. This situation felt different. Longer timeline. Less visible stakes. But potentially broader consequences. And I had a growing sense that whatever attention Daniel's companies were attracting wasn't finished building yet. Sometimes pressure tests resilience. Sometimes it reveals hidden vulnerabilities. And sometimes it forces decisions nobody expected to face again. Pressure doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just accumulates quietly, small changes in tone, subtle questions, unexpected interest from people who previously didn't care. Most civilians don't notice those shifts. People with operational backgrounds usually do. Daniel's companies were still performing well. Logistics contracts stable. Infrastructure projects progressing. Veteran advisory initiatives gaining recognition in professional circles. On paper, everything looked positive. But attention had changed. Not the supportive kind. The evaluative kind. New faces began appearing at meetings. Investors who asked more about crisis protocols than profit margins. Consultants who seemed less interested in operations and more curious about leadership resilience, communication chains, personnel backgrounds. Nothing inappropriate. Just, pointed. Daniel handled it with his usual calm professionalism. Full transparency. Clear documentation. No defensiveness. That approach had built his success after recovery. Stability attracts opportunity. Still, I recognized another dynamic forming. Opportunity attracts leverage too. During one advisory review, I suggested routine infrastructure stress testing. Nothing dramatic. Just simulations, supply disruptions, communication failures, operational continuity checks. Daniel agreed immediately. Preparation had served him well before. And preparation rarely signals weakness. Meanwhile, the veteran advisory program expanded steadily. Former service members transitioning into civilian roles found meaningful work. Crisis planning, logistics optimization, infrastructure resilience, skills translating effectively. That part gave me genuine satisfaction. Because impact matters more than recognition. At home, life stayed steady. My wife appreciated predictable schedules. My son asked thoughtful questions about leadership, responsibility, decision-making. Conversations deeper than they used to be. Experience changes perspective. Family stability reinforced why this transition path made sense. Then came the first direct conversation about external pressure. Not from me. From Daniel. We're attracting attention beyond business interest, he said calmly one evening. Not hostile. Just, strategic observation. That matched my assessment. Preparation phase, I replied. Not reaction phase. He nodded. Neither of us believed immediate danger existed. But ignoring evolving dynamics rarely helps either. So adjustment stayed proportional. Enhanced communication clarity. Routine operational transparency. Security awareness without visible escalation. Balanced response. Weeks passed. Nothing dramatic happened. Which in some ways confirmed our approach. Because overreaction can create the very instability you're trying to prevent. Still, one detail stayed in the back of my mind. That helicopter flight years ago. Low fuel. Bad weather. Uncertain outcome. Pressure revealing character. Daniel often referenced that moment as a turning point for him. I was starting to see it might be one for me too. Because moving from battlefield urgency to civilian strategic stability requires different skills. Different patience. Different awareness. And sometimes, The biggest challenges aren't immediate crises. They're long-term responsibilities. Quiet ones. The kind that don't make headlines, but shape outcomes anyway. Which meant whatever attention Daniel's world was drawing, we'd handle it the same way that helicopter flight was handled. Calmly. Professionally. Without unnecessary drama. Because sometimes the best way through pressure is simply staying steady until it passes. Or transforms into something new. The first real disruption didn't come as a threat. It came as a delay. One of Daniel's largest infrastructure shipments, medical supplies, ironically, stalled unexpectedly at a regional transit hub. Paperwork correct. Cargo intact. No official violation cited. Just administrative review. On paper, routine. Operationally, inconvenient. Practically, disruptive. Medical logistics don't tolerate extended delays well. Hospitals rely on consistency. Communities rely on continuity. Even short interruptions ripple outward quickly. Daniel stayed calm. Documentation is solid, he said. It'll clear. Likely true. Still, timing mattered. Because delays coincided with increased external interest we'd already noticed. That correlation didn't prove intent, but it justified attention. I offered support in communication coordination, nothing more. Military advisory experience sometimes helps clarify procedural bottlenecks without escalating tension. Civilian systems respond better to clarity than pressure. The shipment cleared 48 hours later. No damage. No missing inventory. No explanation either. That last part lingered. Not alarming. Just incomplete. And incomplete information tends to attract curiosity. Media picked up a small piece about supply chain reliability soon after. Nothing dramatic. Just industry commentary. Still, visibility increased. Visibility brings scrutiny. Scrutiny brings questions. Questions sometimes bring opportunity, and sometimes bring leverage attempts. Daniel handled inquiries professionally. Transparent answers. No defensiveness. Consistent messaging. That approach kept things stable externally. Internally, we refined preparedness quietly. Routine operational drills. Communication redundancies. Leadership continuity planning. Standard resilience measures. At home, conversations stayed balanced. My wife understood enough not to worry unnecessarily. My son appreciated seeing professional responsibility applied outside military environments. That perspective shift mattered. Because resilience isn't exclusive to conflict zones. Communities, businesses, families, all require stability under pressure sometimes. Weeks passed again. No escalation. No new disruptions. Which suggested the delay had been exactly what it appeared, administrative complication amplified by timing. Still, the experience reinforced something important. Success attracts complexity. Not always conflict. But rarely simplicity. Daniel acknowledged that during one late conversation. I used to think survival was the hardest part, he said. Turns out maintaining stability afterward requires different discipline. He wasn't wrong. Battlefield urgency demands immediate action. Civilian leadership demands sustained consistency. Different pressures. Different skills. Same underlying responsibility. Looking back at that helicopter flight, I realized something quietly. Saving his life had created a connection. But sustaining that connection responsibly required ongoing awareness. Not heroics. Not dramatic gestures. Just steady professionalism. Which, honestly, is how most meaningful outcomes happen. Quietly. Consistently. Without headlines. And maybe that's the real continuation of the story. Not crisis. Not danger. Just two people navigating responsibility in different worlds. Linked by one moment where fuel was low, weather was bad, and someone chose to stay focused instead of stepping back. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it shapes years afterward. And sometimes it simply reminds you that stability itself is worth protecting. Years passed before I fully understood what that helicopter flight actually meant. At the time, it felt simple. A wounded civilian. Limited fuel. Bad weather. Professional duty. Stabilize, land, transfer care. Mission complete. That's how military operations train you to think: clear objectives, measurable outcomes, defined endpoints. But life outside uniform doesn't follow that structure. Daniel's recovery, his business growth, the advisory work, the veteran transition programs, none of that showed up in the original mission report. No after-action briefing predicted those consequences. Yet they happened. And they mattered. His company stabilized supply chains in regions that needed reliability. Veteran employment opportunities expanded quietly. Infrastructure resilience improved in ways most people never noticed. No headlines. Just impact. That's when I realized something important. Saving a life rarely ends with survival. It often starts a chain reaction you don't see immediately. The external pressure we'd sensed eventually settled too. Not dramatically. Just gradual normalization. Investors clarified intentions. Partnerships stabilized. Administrative complications resolved. The background noise faded. Preparation helped. Transparency helped more. Consistency helped most. Daniel once told me the helicopter flight taught him patience under uncertainty. I hadn't considered that perspective before. For me, it was another evacuation. For him, it was a moment where someone stayed focused when stepping back would have been easier. Different viewpoints. Same event. That's how influence spreads quietly. At home, stability deepened. My wife appreciated the predictable rhythm of advisory work. My son started considering logistics and crisis management studies himself, not military necessarily, but responsibility-oriented careers. Legacy doesn't always follow identical paths. Sometimes it adapts. And that's healthy. Daniel and I stayed in contact, though less frequently as systems stabilized. No dependency. Just mutual respect. Occasional consultation. Professional friendship built on shared experience rather than obligation. Which is how sustainable relationships usually form. Looking back now, I don't think about the money he earned. 10 million. More than that now probably. That part never mattered much. What mattered was what he did afterward. Infrastructure support. Veteran opportunities. Community stability. Quiet leadership. Because survival without purpose rarely satisfies people long-term. And purpose often emerges from moments of pressure. That helicopter flight wasn't heroic. It was focused. Professional. Necessary. But it changed two trajectories. His toward rebuilding with intention. Mine toward understanding that service doesn't end when deployments do. It evolves. Sometimes into mentorship. Sometimes infrastructure work. Sometimes simply steady presence in environments that benefit from it. And maybe that's the hidden chapter here. Not the rescue. Not the wealth. Not even the advisory partnership. Just the realization that one decision, staying present under pressure, can echo far beyond the original moment. Often quietly. Often invisibly. But meaningfully. Which, in the end, is usually enough. If this story stayed with you, there are more like it on Hidden Chapters Military. You can like the video and subscribe for the next chapter. And before you go, how much of this was decided by time alone?